Chapter 1. The Investigation Report. As a fine mist of rain drifted from the morning spring sky above, an overweight bald gentleman in a dark duster coat knocked on the front door of the well-kept cottage in the small town of Lufkin, Texas. The front door was unlocked and slowly opened, and a very pretty woman in her mid-30s with raven hair and turquoise blue eyes peeked out from behind the screen door. "Hello, can I help you?" "Margaret Truman?" "Yes." "My name is Lieutenant Perry Morgan, and I was sent by Lufkin PD to ask a few questions about the disappearance of your husband, Thomas," he said, flashing a badge. "Yes, I've been expecting you, Lieutenant. Come right on in," she said, opening the screen door wide so he could enter. She closed the screen door behind him and latched it, leaving the other door open so the cool breeze drawn in by a ceiling fan would bring fresh air into her living room. Perry noticed a pleasant slight apple cinnamon scent in the air. It made him hungry for apple pie. Maybe he would stop at a diner on the way back to the station for a big slice. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. Can I get you a cup of coffee before we start? Just brewed it." "That would be much appreciated," he answered as she headed to the kitchen, and he browsed around the room at family pictures and knickknacks carefully placed in neat strategic cubbyholes on bookshelves and accent tables. He could tell from the sparkling cleanliness this woman was an anal housekeeper. Margaret returned with a tray with 2 steaming cups of Java and a plate with a pile of homemade oatmeal raisin cookies. "I haven't been able to sleep since Thomas went missing, so I've been baking." "Marvelous. I love oatmeal raisin cookies. My late wife Lisa used to make them all the time for me." "Well, you just eat all you wish. I'll prepare you a doggy bag to take back to your office when you leave." "That would make me a very happy cop, Margaret. Do you mind if I call you Margaret?" "Not at all. May I call you Perry?" "Of course." Taking a bite of a cookie and adding cream and 4 teaspoons of sugar to his coffee, then taking a long drawn-out sip, he smiled, his eyes twinkling, and commented, "Delicious." She innocently smiled at him and questioned, "How does this work, Perry?" He pulled out a small digital recorder from his coat pocket and asked, "Do you mind if I record?" "Not at all. Just do what you have to." "Okay, Margaret. Just tell me in your own words what you remember from the day your husband Thomas went missing." Margaret's eyes reddened and suddenly swelled up with tears, and one slowly slipped down the side of her flushed cheek. She lifted her right hand up to her mouth and coughed, gagged a bit, then gained her composure and responded to his request. "Well, it was just yesterday morning, and Thomas was going through his daily routine, usually about 4 hours a day, writing in his man cave office in the back of the house. I didn't know if you knew it, but he had just taken a break from corporate life a year ago and was trying his hand at writing a new novel and some spec feature screenplays. This was always a dream of his, but you know sometimes life gets in the way. We never had children due to medical reasons, but had managed to squirrel away enough money for him to pursue it full time for at least a couple of years. He had me quit my job as well, so we were always together most of the time, except for those 4 hours every day he spent writing with the door latched, so he had no distractions." "And that day, he never came out of his office after the usual 4 hours." "That's correct. Sometimes he would be so into a project, he might spend an extra hour or 2 in there. I never would bother him because I knew he was in that room working. I didn't want to act up like Marilyn Monroe did when she was married to Arthur Miller. They say she would sit outside the locked door to his writing room and cry hysterically because he gave more attention to his work than he did to her." "Yes, I do seem to remember reading something about that." "Anyways, he could always be heard typing away on that old 1937 Royal typewriter he had bought at auction a few years back, so I usually could count on that to be a sign he was working. Sometimes he would stop typing for a while and do some research on his laptop or to take notes or outline something, but most of the time he was just typing. I never understood why he just didn't write using the word processor on his laptop. He said it would distract him too much because of emails and social networking apps. Margaret added, "Besides, he would always remind me. The auction house that sold him the typewriter had given him a certificate of authenticity that documented the typewriter had once been owned by Francis Scott Fitzgerald, the great American author who wrote The Great Gatsby and several other works of renowned literature. Faced with financial difficulties due to the declining popularity of his works, Fitzgerald was contracted to write scripts for several movie studios, including Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in 1937. Thomas always said that typewriter was his good luck charm." "Really? That's interesting. So what time did you come to realize Thomas was not in his office?" "He usually started at 8 a.m., so it was around 1 p.m. when I got worried and went to check on him. I knocked several times and he wouldn't answer, so I unlocked the door using an old credit card and he wasn't in there. There was no way he could have slipped out of the house without me hearing, and his pickup truck was parked outside in the driveway next to my Jeep. I tried calling his iPhone, but it went straight to voicemail. I found it later to be covered with a bunch of notes on his desk, and a half-typewritten page was still loaded in his typewriter. I checked every nook and cranny inside and outside the house, but there was no trace of him. That's when I called 911. "Please excuse me for asking, but were you and Thomas having any relationship problems?" "No, we are and always have been totally in love with each other, totally dedicated to one another." "I'm sorry for inquiring, but it is something we have to ask the spouse of a missing person. If you were asked to consent to a polygraph test, would you agree?" "Of course I would, Perry. That man is my whole life, and there is no way in hell I would ever do anything to harm him. I will do all I can just to find out what has happened to him." "I believe you, ma'am. Just a matter of investigative policy." "I understand." "Does Thomas have any close friends or acquaintances that you know of?" "He's a partial introvert, actually. He just wanted to spend all his free time with me or writing. I wouldn't have it any other way. Our parents and family members live up in Buffalo, New York. We moved down here when Thomas got a great offer to write content for an internet startup down the road in nearby Nacogdoches. He really didn't have any friends at work either that I know of." "Was there anything other than that which might have stood out from when he disappeared?" "Yes, it had suddenly begun storming outside. The lights flickered a few times, but we never totally lost electricity. There were several lightning strikes, one loud one at around 11 a.m. The weather had calmed down just before the time I knocked on Thomas's office door." "Our crime scene investigation unit did a thorough walkthrough of Thomas's office and the rest of your home just about an hour after you called into the department. I should know a bit more about the results sometime tomorrow, and will keep you up to date on the results. I think this pretty much wraps up my initial interview with you. Be assured, we will be keeping you up to date on our findings, and I hope we can possibly finally locate Thomas and bring him home." "Thank you, Perry. This has been really hard for me. Thomas has always been my rock." "Do you have anyone who might be able to stay with you for a few days?" "My sister Candy is flying in later this afternoon from Buffalo, so yes." "Good, very good. I would like to thank you so much for your cooperation, Margaret, and the cookies and coffee. Here is my card in case you remember anything else later. Call any time." Margaret smiled and said, "Hold on just a second before you leave." She ran into the kitchen and came bouncing back out with a big bag of oatmeal raisin cookies. "Oh my, these will surely be appreciated by the guys and me at the precinct. Try to get some rest, and just know that we are hard at work trying to get some answers for you." "I will," she answered, waving at him and watching him drive down the road into the distance before finally closing and latching the front door.